I want to tell you something I have never told another living soul. There was a night, not long ago, when I sat in my kitchen, in the dark with the phone in my hand, and I could not think of a single person to call. Not one. 81 years old, and the silence in that house was so heavy. I remember thinking it had a weight to it, like it was sitting on my chest. I had already decided, in my mind, how the rest of my life was going to go. Alone, quiet, forgotten. I had made my peace with it, or so I told myself. But 3 days later, a stranger stopped me on the sidewalk outside a pharmacy I had walked past 1,000 times, and put something in my hands that I did not ask for, did not want, and almost gave back. I did not give it back, and what happened after that, I still can hardly believe it happened to me. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more interesting stories. By the end of this video, I am going to tell you exactly what that stranger said to me, word for word, because I have never forgotten it. But first, I want you to understand who I was before that day, because I think some of you might see yourselves in me, and if you do, I need you to stay until the end. Not for my sake, for yours. My name is Margaret, and this is my story. I was born in a small town, the kind where everybody knew your business before you did. I married young, raised 2 children, buried a husband of 46 years, and somewhere in the last decade, I watched my whole world shrink down to the size of one house, one recliner, and one television that talked more than any person did. I am not telling you this for sympathy. I am telling you because I know I am not the only one. If you are sitting there right now, in a quiet room, with the volume turned up just so the house doesn't feel so empty, I see you. I was you. And I promise you what I found on that sidewalk changed the way I understood everything. My faith, my family, even my own reasons for waking up in the morning. So let me take you back, not to the stranger yet. Let me take you back to how a woman gets to 81 years old and finds herself ready to give up. Loneliness does not arrive all at once. I want you to understand that because I think people imagine it slams the door shut in one moment. It doesn't. It comes in like water under a door. Slow, quiet. You don't notice the floor is wet until you're standing in a puddle. For me, it started small. My husband, Walter, passed when I was 72. We had been married so long that I genuinely did not know how to exist without the sound of him in the house. His radio in the mornings, his heavy step on the stairs, the smell of his coffee before mine was even started. When he died, the house didn't just lose a person, it lost its rhythm. My daughter, Ellen, lived 4 states away with her own family, her own busy life, her own reasons. Good reasons, I want to say that clearly, for not calling as often as either of us would have liked. My son David and I had a falling out some years before that. I won't get into just yet, but I'll tell you this. Pride is a strange thing. It can sit between 2 people who love each other, and neither one will move first. So there I was, a woman who had spent her whole life taking care of others, a husband, 2 children, a mother in her final years, neighbors who needed a casserole or a ride to church, and suddenly, nobody needed me for anything at all. Do you know what that does to a person? To go from being needed every single day to not being needed at all? I used to set the table for 2 out of habit. I'd catch myself doing it, and I'd just stand there, staring at that second plate, feeling foolish. Then I'd put it back in the cupboard. Some nights I didn't even bother eating at the table. I'd eat standing at the counter, like eating alone at a table made the loneliness official somehow, like the empty chair was proof of something I didn't want to admit. I stopped going to church around that same time, not because I lost my faith, not exactly, but because sitting in a pew surrounded by families, by couples holding hands, by children fidgeting next to their grandmothers, it became harder than staying home. Isn't that a strange thing? The one place that was supposed to comfort me became the place that reminded me most of what I'd lost. My neighbor, a kind woman named Doris, used to check on me every so often, but even Doris had her own health troubles, her own grandchildren visiting on weekends, her own life pulling her in 100 directions. I never blamed her. I just noticed, the way you notice a light going dim in another room, that even that connection was fading. By the time I turned 80, I had stopped answering the phone unless I recognized the number. I had stopped opening the curtains some mornings. I had stopped, if I'm honest with you, expecting anything good to happen to me ever again. I want to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever made a list in your head of all the reasons your life still matters? I tried to make that list one night, and I sat there for a long, long time, and I could not finish it. That is a frightening thing to admit, but I think somebody needs to hear it today. Because if you're making that same list right now, and it's coming up short, I need you to keep listening, because mine did too. And I was wrong. I was so wrong about what was coming. I told you about the kitchen, the phone in my hand. Let me tell you the rest of that night, because it matters. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were bin collection days, and I had forgotten to put mine out again, the 3rd week in a row. Something about forgetting that little task, something so small and ordinary, undid me completely. I sat down at the kitchen table and I just stopped. Stopped moving, stopped thinking about what to make for supper, stopped pretending that tomorrow was going to look any different than today. I picked up the phone. I scrolled through the names. My daughter, it wasn't a good time, I told myself. She'd worry, and I didn't want to be a burden. My son, well, we hadn't spoken in almost 2 years, and pride is a heavy stone to move at 81. Doris, asleep by then, surely. A few old friends from church, most of whom had passed on themselves, or moved into homes where the phones didn't always reach them the way they used to. I sat there with that phone glowing in the dark kitchen, and I realized something that scared me more than anything ever had in my whole life. There was no one. Not because people didn't love me. I want to be very clear about that, because I think this is where so many of us get it wrong. It wasn't that nobody loved me. It was that I had let myself become so small, so quiet, so out of the habit of reaching out and being reached for, that in the moment I needed someone the most, I couldn't find a single hand to hold. I'm 81 years old, and I've buried a husband, 2 brothers, and more friends than I can count on both hands. I know what it is to be tired down to your bones, not the kind of tired sleep fixes, but the kind that settles into your spirit. I sat in that kitchen until nearly 2 in the morning. I didn't do anything dangerous. I want to reassure you of that. But I made a decision that night. A quiet, resigned kind of decision. I decided that whatever time I had left, I would simply get through it. Not live it, just get through it. Day by day, meal by meal, until it was over. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I think some of you know exactly what I mean. There's a difference between living and getting through, and I had crossed that line without even noticing. I went to bed that night believing my story had already been written, that the interesting parts, the meaningful parts, were behind me, and all that remained was the slow business of waiting. I could not have been more wrong, and 3 days later, everything I believed about my life, about being forgotten, about being finished, was about to be turned upside down by a complete stranger on an ordinary sidewalk on an ordinary Friday morning. Friday. I remember it was overcast, that soft gray light we get before it decides whether to rain or clear up. I had to walk to the pharmacy 2 blocks from my house to pick up a prescription. My knees don't allow me to drive much anymore, and truth be told, I didn't mind the walk. It was one of the only reasons I left the house most weeks. I had my coat buttoned to the top, my handbag over my arm, and my mind, if I'm honest, wasn't really anywhere at all. I was just moving my feet, the way you do when a task is more habit than intention. That's when I saw her. An older woman, though I'd guess younger than me, maybe in her 60s, standing near the corner, not begging, not selling anything, just standing there, the way you might if you were waiting for someone. She had a canvas bag over her shoulder, plain clothes, kind eyes. Nothing about her stood out, and yet, something about the way she looked at me as I approached made me slow my steps. She said, "Ma'am, I hope you don't mind me stopping you. Now, I want you to understand, I am not the kind of woman who talks to strangers on the street. Walter used to tease me about it. I'd walk right past a person selling flowers or asking for directions, eyes forward, polite nod, keep moving. That was my way. It had always been my way. But something in her voice made me stop. She reached into that canvas bag and pulled out a small Bible. Worn, the kind with a soft leather cover that's gone thin and pale at the corners from years of handling. Not gift shop new. Lived in, loved. She held it out to me and said, "I don't know why, but I felt like I was supposed to give this to you today." I stood there on that sidewalk, completely still, and I want to tell you, my first instinct was to say no. Politely, but no. I had a Bible at home, Walter's mother's Bible, sitting on a shelf collecting dust, the way so many good things in my house had started to collect dust. I didn't need another one. And besides, who does that? Who stops a stranger on a sidewalk to hand them scripture? But there was something about her face. She wasn't looking at me like I was a project, or a stranger to convert, or someone to feel sorry for. She was looking at me the way you look at someone you've known your whole life. Familiar, warm, like she already knew something about me that I hadn't said out loud to anyone. I took it. I don't fully know why. My hands moved before my mind agreed to it. And then she said the words I told you at the beginning of this video, the words I have never forgotten. She said, "Whatever you decided 3 nights ago, he didn't agree to it." I want you to imagine standing on a public sidewalk, holding a stranger's Bible, and hearing those words. 3 nights ago, my kitchen, my phone, my silent, resigned decision that my story was already finished. I hadn't told a single person about that night. Not Doris, not my daughter, no one. I stood there frozen, and by the time I found my voice enough to ask her how she could possibly know that, how she could possibly say those specific words to me, she was already walking away, calm, unhurried, like she'd simply delivered a package and moved on to the next address. I called after her. She didn't turn around. Within moments she had turned a corner, and though I walked to that same corner myself, as fast as my knees would allow, there was no sign of her, not on that street, not on the next one. Gone, like she had never been there at all, except for the small, worn Bible now sitting heavy and warm in my two hands. I stood on that street corner for I don't know how long. People walked past me, cars went by, and I just stood there, holding this book, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. I felt seen. I didn't open that Bible right away. I want to be honest with you about that. I carried it home, set it on my kitchen table, the same table where, 3 nights before, I had sat with my phone and my silence, and I just looked at it for the better part of an hour. Part of me was afraid of it, if that makes any sense. Afraid of what it might stir up. Afraid, maybe, that if I opened it and felt nothing, that would confirm what I'd already decided about myself, that I was simply too far gone, too tired, too forgotten for anything to reach me anymore. But eventually, my hands opened it anyway. The pages were soft, worn thin in places, the way pages get when someone has turned to them again and again over years. And tucked inside, near the middle, I found something I wasn't expecting at all. A handwritten note on a small slip of paper, tucked into the pages like a bookmark. It wasn't addressed to me. How could it have been? But it read, in careful, aged handwriting, "To whoever needs this next. I carried this through my own hardest years. It didn't fix everything, but it kept me company when nothing else would. Pass it on when you're ready. You'll know when." I sat with that note for a long time. I thought about the woman on the sidewalk. Was it hers originally? Had she carried it herself through some hard season, the way the note described? Or had it been passed to her, the way it was now being passed to me? I never found out. I never saw her again, not once, not in all the months since, though I confess I look for her every time I walk that street. But that note did something to me. It reminded me that I wasn't the only person who had ever sat in a dark kitchen and run out of names to call. That loneliness, as private and shameful as it can feel, is one of the most common experiences a human being can have. And yet we treat it like a secret we have to keep. I began reading that evening, not with any grand plan, just turning pages, the way you might reacquaint yourself with an old friend after years apart. And I found myself drawn, again and again, to the Psalms. There's a rawness to them I had forgotten, real anguish, real doubt, real exhaustion, written by people who, thousands of years ago, sat in their own version of my dark kitchen and wondered if anyone was listening. One passage in particular stopped me cold, words about being brought low and yet not abandoned. I won't pretend I understood, in that moment, some grand theological truth. What I understood, simply, was this. Someone, a very long time ago, felt exactly what I had felt 3 nights before, and they were still here, in these pages, still speaking, still, somehow, keeping me company. I read until nearly midnight that first night, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I did not feel the silence in that house as a weight. I felt it as a kind of stillness. There's a difference, and I don't think I understood that difference until that night. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the curtains before 9. I wish I could tell you my whole life transformed overnight, that some great miracle rearranged everything and I never felt lonely again. That wouldn't be honest, and I promised myself, telling you this story, that I would only tell you the truth. What changed was smaller than that, and in some ways bigger than that. I started reading a little each morning, the way some people have their coffee. It became a small ritual, just 15, 20 minutes, before the day got its hooks into me. And slowly, I noticed something shifting in the way I thought about my own days. I stopped measuring them by how empty they felt, and started noticing the small things again, the way morning light came through my kitchen window, the sound of birds I hadn't paid attention to in years. But the bigger change was this, that note in the Bible, "Pass it on when you're ready, you'll know when." It stayed with me. And about 6 weeks after that morning on the sidewalk, I did something I hadn't had the courage to do in almost 2 years. I called my son. I won't pretend that conversation was easy. Pride doesn't dissolve in a single phone call, and old wounds don't heal just because you finally decide to speak. But I told David something I'd never said to him plainly before, that I was proud of him, that I missed him, and that whatever had come between us, I didn't want it to be the last thing standing there when one of us ran out of time. There was a long silence on his end of that call, and then he said quietly, "I've been wanting you to call for a long time, Mom." We talked for almost 2 hours that day. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Those things take time, and we're still working on it, truth be told. But it was a door opening that I had genuinely believed was closed for good. I also went back to church, not that first Sunday, and not the one after. It took me a little while to work up the courage, but I went, and I sat in that pew, surrounded by families and couples and fidgeting children, and instead of feeling the ache of what I'd lost, I found myself feeling something closer to gratitude. Grateful to still be there. Grateful for one more Sunday. I even started something new, something I never imagined myself doing at 81. I began visiting a woman 2 streets over, a widow even older than me, whose daughter had mentioned to Doris that her mother didn't get many visitors. I bring her tea some Wednesday afternoons. We don't talk about anything important, mostly. The weather, old recipes, her late husband's terrible jokes. But I see now what that hour means to her, because I remember, so clearly, what it would have meant to me. I never found that woman with the canvas bag again. I've come to believe, and you can make of this whatever you like, that she wasn't meant to be found again. She delivered what she needed to deliver, and she moved on. The way, perhaps, someone will one day deliver something to someone else through me. That Bible sits on my kitchen table now, not on a shelf collecting dust. I read from it most mornings, and in the back cover I've begun writing my own note, not finished yet, but started, because I understand now what that woman meant. You'll know when. I think about that Tuesday night often, not with the same darkness I felt at the time, but with a strange kind of tenderness, because I understand now that the woman who sat in that kitchen, believing her story was finished, had no idea that 3 days later, everything was going to open back up. If you are sitting somewhere right now, in a quiet room, feeling like your story has already been written, like the meaningful chapters are behind you, and all that's left is the getting through, I want you to hear me clearly. You do not know what is 3 days away from you. I certainly didn't. I am not going to tell you that a stranger with a Bible is waiting around every corner. Life doesn't work in guarantees like that, and I wouldn't insult you by pretending it does. But I will tell you this. Loneliness lies. It tells you that you are forgotten, that no one is thinking of you, that your usefulness has an expiration date. And every single one of those things is a lie I believed for years, right up until the moment it wasn't true anymore. If there is one thing I hope you carry away from my story today, it's this. Reach out before you think you need to. Call the name on your phone that you've been avoiding out of pride or fear or simple exhaustion. Open the curtains before you feel like it. Walk to the corner store even when it feels pointless. Because you never know which ordinary Friday is the one where everything quietly begins to change. I was ready to die alone at 81. I am not ready anymore, not even a little. If this story meant something to you today, I would be so grateful if you'd stay a while longer, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and tell me in the comments, has there ever been a moment in your own life that changed everything, the way that Sidewalk changed mine? I read every single one. Thank you for sitting with me today. Have a blessed evening.